Okay, let's continue with our special topic on research ethics, Module 9, on deception in experiments. Previously, we talked about, or we used two examples to illustrate the use of deception in experimental studies. And we asked ourselves this particular question, that is, would deception be ever allowed in research studies ever? Before we address that question, which you're not going to hear a definitive answer because it is a debate. But before we go there, let's talk about the ethical concerns or considerations that are related to the Tuskegee study and the bystander empathy study. So the first ethical concern that many medical professionals had with the Tuskegee study is that researchers they were not honest about the goal of the research, because researchers told the participants that the study is to treat bad blood instead of treating syphilis. So bad blood was that this term was purposely chosen to be a very vague and general term, so that non-medical professionals they know bad blood is something bad, but they don't know the exact meaning of this term, especially among the with the colloquial expressions of the local African American individuals. So of course the Tuskegee study researchers would justify the use of this vague term because if you tell participants that the true purpose of the study is to document the natural progression of syphilis untreated, then they would not have the cooperation of subjects. And without the cooperation of subjects, that is, if all of them would like the treatment, then that would defeat the purpose of the study. So that's one point of controversy. The second, and perhaps a much bigger ethical concern of the Tuskegee study, is researchers deprived subjects of their right to receive proper treatments of fatal disease. Right? Syphilis can kill you. But with the knowledge that without proper and timely treatments, or at least some of the subjects might die, the researchers just continue with the study and never gave the subjects any kind of proper treatments. So that really is what got this Tuskegee study terminated by the U.S. government after several years. So the first issue here is that there's no informed consent. Well, I mean, those participants might have given consent to the study, but definitely they were not informed because they were told the wrong, or the false purpose of the study. And of course, the second practice directly violated the basic professional ethics of medical researchers, and that is their duty to always protect subjects from harm. So with this, you might argue that the practitioners or the researchers involved with the Tuskegee study, they did not really impose harm to those subjects, but definitely they're not protecting subjects from harm when they know that subjects were suffering from a potentially fatal disease. It is at least with these, or for these two ethical concerns, the U.S. government terminated this study, and that's actually the backdrop of the birth of the Baumann Report. Recall that Baumann Report is really a federal government in the context of the U.S. that stipulated all the research ethical requirements for research with human subjects. So the Baumann Report was actually a response to this Tuskegee study. With the bystander empathy experiment, the major issue is a concealment of the true purpose of the study. Um, it means that the researchers withdrew critical information from the naive participants, fellow passengers on the train, so that the participants did not know that the study involved a perfectly healthy Confederate. So that's pretty much unless you dive into the study with greater detail, but on the surface of it, that's the main issue here. That is, you do not actually know whether or not the fellow passengers would like to be a subject. You do not have their so here, not just they're not only not informed, but they do not even have the opportunity to provide consent, because you never know whether or not a fellow passenger would like to be a participant in the study. So in this sense, the fellow passengers on that subway train was forced to participate, and that of course violates the foremost principle that all participation in research with human subjects must be voluntary. So that's a big issue here. So after all these examples and discussions, we ask ourselves this question then, what is deception research? Here is a working definition. So any action designed to mislead others, participants, by distorting, falsifying, or misinforming so that participants are manipulated to react in a certain manner. So any action of this kind of nature will be called deception in research. So this definition at least identifies two behaviors. The first one is to lie, that is to present false information. The second one is to conceal information, that is to omit important or relevant information about the research. So the question that we ultimately would like to discuss or address is, can we find proper justification for deception in experimental design? Definitely there are two camps of scholars. The first camp is saying that deception is totally justifiable because, as we said before, with many studies, including the infamous Tuskegee study, is that using deception sometimes is the only way to obtain certain kinds of information. Secondly, some will argue that participants do not necessarily perceive that they're harmed when they're involved in some kind of manipulated situation. And even after they were told that they just participated in a research with manipulation, participants did not report the perception of being harmed. They do not mind being misled. And the argument is that, well, if the potential quote unquote victim do not see any harm in this, then there's no reason to object the use of manipulation and deception. And the third reason is about the accuracy of research results, right? Somewhat related to point one. Point one is sometimes without using deception, we will never be able to obtain the information we want. And point three is about, okay, so maybe we can choose not to use deception, but if we not use deception, we can get some information, but that information might be biased. So in order to have unbiased results, deception sometimes is necessary. And lastly, we have arguments against the use of deception. The first principle is really based on a human rights perspective. That is, any deception in research is to take advantage of the implicit trust and obedience the subjects provide to researchers. That is, you're really abusing that that perceived goodwill that participants had toward researchers, and any exploitation of that perceived goodwill is a no-no. And sort of relatedly, this camp of researchers argue that it's not just about researchers cannot exploit the trust that subjects have, but researchers must also protect the dignity of participants. The second reason that some researchers oppose deception research is that subjects, they're not dumb. They're sometimes way more intelligent than researchers. So the argument is, for example, in the lighting conditions study that I mentioned in the last part, subjects might ask, themselves, why am I put in a dim room? Is this study somewhat related to the lighting condition at all? So the researcher will say, well, once the subjects become suspicious, your results will be compromised anyways. Then why bother with deception? Just tell them the truth. And you should trust the subjects to give unbiased and truthful answers. And lastly, this is a rather philosophical point, or a general point too. That is, to be ethical individuals, you must, be holding yourself by very high standards, especially as researchers. And once you lie to or conceal information from subjects, you sort of violate this standard of having good integrity, and that's not good at all. So see here, there seems to be quite balanced reasons to argue for or against the use of deception research. And as I said earlier, there's no really a definitive answer as to whether or not deception should be allowed at all. It's basically a case-by-case decision made by IRB. So in closing, let me just say this. First of all, deception sometimes and is actually often used in research, and IRB would approve of that, as long as you provide a strong argument as to why deception must be used in this research, and you as the researcher must provide concrete safeguarding measures as to not harm subjects with your deception practices. Once IRB notice or has suspicion of any kind of harm that you might impose on subjects through deception, they're going to just kill your study. Your study has no chance to be conducted unless you revise your study to the satisfaction of the IRB board. Okay, so that concludes our module on deception experiments. See you next time.